Good day to you, and welcome to Fascinating. I'm your host, Rick, from planet Vulcan. My ongoing mission on planet Earth to search for signs of intelligence and to encourage its spread. In a Season 1 Fascinating podcast, I argued that choosing a problem-solving approach to a challenge, as opposed to a trade-off approach, would inevitably lead to suboptimal outcomes for reasons that are well understood. Reasons we will get to later, as it clearly has done in Earth's recent challenge from the COVID-19 virus. Officials made many poor decisions by adopting the problem-solving approach and proceeded as if the virus had to be controlled at any cost. And we saw a lot of overreach and grandstanding by officials who couldn't seem to get enough of exercising authority. It is not difficult to see why outcomes are suboptimal with the problem-solving approach if you scrutinize the methods that would be employed in the trade-off approach. In the trade-off approach to any challenge, you begin by acknowledging that the challenge du jour is not the only challenge facing humanity. This realization leads a reasoning person to a further realization that, since resources are always scarce, you must scrutinize the costs of any particular course of action in terms of opportunities lost to protect and further other goals, and to determine the optimal course of action based on a comparison of values and costs, if you want the most bang for your limited bucks. In the problem-solving approach, the indiscriminate mandates that are employed when you focus your tunnel vision on just one challenge frequently end up costing more than they are worth. Which brings us to the challenge of how to deal with climate change on planet Earth. Generally speaking, we Vulcans have no interest in weighing in on your disputes over policy, with all the partisan squabbling and jockeying for position that takes place, and usually without any party to the dispute making much sense. We have better things to do than to offer opinions about the arrangements of your deck chairs. Deck chairs are one thing, icebergs are another matter entirely. And climate change is an iceberg. There are a couple of things Earthlings need to understand about climate change. First, it is undeniably true that climate change is happening on planet Earth, and the evidence is substantial that increased concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane in Earth's atmosphere caused by human activity are significant contributing factors. Second, the best evidence at this time leads to the conclusion that although climate change on planet Earth will present challenges, it is most unlikely to lead to catastrophe. Many Earthlings who are crying catastrophe seem to be doing so because they believe that exaggerating the challenge is the best way to motivate people. No doubt some of them actually believe the exaggerations. Third, if Earthlings respond to the challenge of climate change by adopting a problem-solving approach, the results of your efforts will be suboptimal, to put it mildly. There is no chance that the problem will be solved, and the actions everyone is proposing in an attempt at a solution would very likely create a net loss to humanity because of the damage to your capacity to produce efficiently. Resources that might be employed to meet the challenge would be squandered or never materialize in the first place because the production and distribution of resources would be straitjacketed by top-down regulation. And as it inevitably becomes clear that economic damage is becoming extensive as well as unevenly distributed, it is all but certain that many countries which had made pledges to take mitigative actions will decide that the cost to them of doing so is greater than the benefit to them and will drop out of any accords. And many of the pledges that have been made so far have been made with fingers crossed behind the back. Fourth, you need to approach the problem of pollution in general as an externality, and one that has only recently become important enough to warrant attention. Let me refer you again to economist Ronald Coase's hugely influential 1960 article, The Problem of Social Cost, and to economist Harold Demsetz's 1967 article, Towards a Theory of Property Rights, both of which point the way to an effective and efficient method of meeting the problem of climate change. It is fruitless to think of polluters as enemies of the people or as sinners who must be punished, even though doing so might provide those of you with venom in your hearts some visceral, short-lived satisfaction. These sinners and enemies are people just like you, most of them with intentions as good as yours, who simply respond more or less rationally to the incentives they face under the regimes in which they operate. Vilifying your neighbors will not accomplish anything useful, because it is the incentives that need to be reformed if you truly want the results you claim to desire. If Earthlings are serious about adapting to the challenge of climate change, the only path forward that offers hope of doing so efficiently or even effectively is to harness market processes and pricing, so that decision-making will be properly incentivized and the trade-offs will be made in a decentralized manner by people who collectively have far more information than any central authority. Let us spell out exactly why it is that decentralized decision-making based on incentives is so much more effective and efficient than command and control. In order to command effectively, you would at least need information. A central authority can gather information to some extent and can probably accumulate more information than any one person can. However, there is much more information out there in distributed form than any central authority can access, especially on a timely basis. Markets excel at discovering distributed information, and the process of discovery is all bound up with pricing. Prices are set by supply and demand, unless someone intervenes, and supply and demand are determined by the behavior of individuals, who base their behavior on the information available to them. The sum total of the available information that is discovered in this manner exceeds by orders of magnitude the information that a central authority can gather. One method involving market processes, which is already being tried, is to establish a market for tradable pollution rights. This approach is promising, although it is fraught with difficulties, the chief one so far being how to establish a price that will be effective. There is a large and growing body of thought which deserves to be more influential about how assignment of property rights, which is the natural way of dealing with evolving externalities, could be employed to deal with the challenge without necessitating intrusive and ineffective intervention. Another proposal that would work along similar principles would be to impose a carbon tax. Again, this approach would allow for decentralized and efficient decision-making that would efficiently take trade-offs into account. Sadly, most people within what we might call the climate movement have tagged the carbon tax proposal as a non-starter, claiming that the voters would never accept it. That might be true if a carbon tax were to become an additional tax rather than an instead tax. Coupling a carbon tax with something like the repeal of the income tax, for which a strong argument can be made in any case, might win over voters. One wonders whether one strong reason for dismissing the carbon tax proposal might be that so many people in the movement, the ones who are saying the voters won't wear it, are actually themselves unwilling to adopt any decentralized, market-oriented approach, because doing so would mean that no one would any longer need them to exercise authority and administer regulations. They are perhaps reluctant to give up command. It seems there is some truth to the somewhat cynical observation about climate activists that many of them are watermelons, green on the outside and red on the inside. After the fall of communism, they needed a place to go, and so they have gravitated towards an issue where they can blame it all on capitalism. Many of those in the movement also typically have a knee-jerk negative reaction to the word market, because they subscribe to the rather silly notion that markets are controlled by someone, and that someone is a rich and powerful oligarchy. This belief is based on an egregious and deeply harmful ignorangi, that is, ignorance spelled backwards, knowing what is not so. The idea that the pervasive order we observe around us is evidence that someone is in charge, even though many people regard that proposition as obvious, is simply incorrect. Earlier installments of the fascinating podcasts and videos have made the case that order emerges spontaneously in response to the energy flowing through systems in interaction with simple local rules, like flocking birds and schooling fish. I would like to call your attention to a recently published book by David Wallace Wells, the title of which is The Uninhabitable Earth, and to give young David 2 cheers for his efforts. David is a rising star among young journalists. He has made climate change and related issues the core of his research and writing and knows whereof he speaks. The value we see in this book is that David has chosen a point of view that eschews ideology and high abstraction and focuses on what actually has worked and is working in the project of mitigating and adapting to climate change. It's marvelous the way his thinking is influenced by evidence and reasoning. Among the things he sees as promising are 2 things we also see as promising, namely, number 1, continued technological innovation, and 2, the use of market processes and pricing. The primary defect we see in his thinking is that he does not question the deus ex machina theory of government that underlies his views. Like most Earthlings in the present era, he still believes in looking at events and developments, imagining himself in a place apart and on a lofty perch. He still believes it is possible to get control of the superorganism known as the socio-economic system, put a saddle on it, and use reins and spurs to guide its course. Much of his writing is centered on the quandaries and dilemmas the regulators on their lofty perches would have to deal with as they decide how best to intervene. All of this discussion, of course, becomes moot when one looks at things from the point of view of a gardener who is cultivating, rather than from the point of view of an architect who is designing. We believe there is a good chance Mr. Wallace Wells will eventually earn his 3rd cheer. He just needs to realize that in reality there is no place apart and there are no lofty perches. He and every other Earthling is in truth merely a cell in the superorganism. Who knows what this brilliant young man might eventually come up with after he flips his Necker cube perspective and adopts the evolutionary way of thinking. I invite you to have a look at the next video on our YouTube channel, Fascinating at Prego de Nada. If you find the lessons from nature in these podcasts and videos personally valuable, please recommend it to your friends, give it a like, and subscribe. Theme music, Helium, with thanks to Track Tribe. Live long and prosper. Savor your experiences. Treasure your memories. Anticipate a happy and rewarding future, and respect nature's wisdom.